unfunded and say they're the real party for business. The SNP are saying the best decisions for Scotland are made in Scotland. Meanwhile, Lib Dem leader Sir Ed Davey fell off a paddleboard while campaigning in Lake Windermere, but once he'd found his feet, he criticised Rishi Sunak's record on the cost of living.
Rents are going up, mortgages are going up, food, energy, and then you hear Rishi Sunak. I think he's on another planet. He seems to think his plan's working.
The Israeli military says a fire which spread through a camp of displaced people in Gaza on Sunday was caused by a secondary explosion. 45 people were killed. And closing arguments are underway in Donald Trump's hush money trial. His lawyers told the jury the former president didn't break the law, and the prosecutions failed to prove that he did. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed down 63 points at 82.54. The pound buys $1.28 and €1.18. LBC weather, cloudy tonight with showers in the north and the west and a low of 9 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, very good evening. It's Tuesday night, it's 8 o'clock, and it is time for Cross Question. Your chance to put your questions to our panel of politicians and political experts. Today on the show, we welcome Sarah Olney, Liberal Democrat Treasury spokesperson and MP for Richmond Park, who's standing in this election. Siobhain McDonagh is Labour MP for Mitchem and Morden, also standing in the election. Robert Shrimsley is Chief UK Political Commentator for the Financial Times. And Nickie Aiken is Conservative MP for the cities of London and Westminster, but she's actually decided to stand down from Parliament and she'll be joining us in just a few moments' time. But as I say, it's your chance to put your questions to the panel. The number to call 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850 and you can send a message via Alexa to LBC by saying, Alexa, send a comment to LBC. And of course, we'd love you to watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, let's speak to Wesley in Gravesend. Wesley, what's your question, please?
Good evening, Iain. Good evening, panel. My question is, if Labour restored the whip and allows Diane Abbott to contest the election as a Labour candidate, wouldn't they still come under fire? Can I just give you some reasoning behind it? Because Diane Abbott was criticised for drinking a mojito on a train, was criticised for wearing 2 different shoes, and I just think she gets criticism for anything that she does. So I just think either way, would Labour still face criticism?
Now, reports this evening say that Diane Abbott has been given the Labour whip back more than a year after being suspended from it over a letter to the Observer newspaper in which she appeared to downplay anti-Semitism. However, it's not clear if she will be standing in the election now or not. Earlier, Labour sources were saying that under no circumstances would she be allowed to. Siobhain McDonagh, just the kind of hole in the head that Labour doesn't need during an election campaign. How has it come to this?
It's just all these internal things are difficult to deal with. I mean, I think a Tory MP who's not restanding got suspended from the party yesterday for supporting another party. So these things do happen during elections. And I wish I could tell you, Iain, but I kind of don't know what the position is myself, other than hearing your news bulletin, which says that Diane has had the whip restored, and in which case she is eligible to stand.
Well, there was a story this morning that's saying it was part of a deal that if she got the whip back, then she would agree not to stand. I mean, it's all terribly complicated.
Yeah,
this.
It is really unclear, and we don't know the ins and outs, the details of it.
Would you like to see her stand as a Labour candidate?
I think if she feels that she can do the job that she has done in the past to represent her constituents and fight for them, and her constituents definitely need to be fought for, and she's got the whip back, that's fine by me.
Because a lot of people in the last hour were saying, well, they've welcomed Natalie Elphicke into the party, someone who's apologised for her comments on abuse of women, and yet Labour seems to put this on the back burner, and it's now reported that the inquiry into Diane Abbott finished in December. And yet on this programme last week, Annalise Dodds told me the inquiry was still ongoing.
Well, I am really sorry. I'd love to tell you if I knew, but I don't know whether it's completed or not completed. What I do know is that in response to the whole issue of anti-Semitism and what happened under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, we now have a very complex, convoluted and, dare I say, expensive complaint system, which is not as straightforward as you would hope.
Robert Shrimsley, what do you make of all of this?
Well, I mean, I think Labour got itself onto a hook on this one, clearly. I think it feels to me as if quietly there's been an attempt to negotiate a sort of agreement whereby she would be let back in but didn't stand again, and that there hadn't been a managed to do it. I do think it's dragged on far too long for any good. If the Labour Party had decided it didn't want her, it could have saved itself some trouble by moving along. And it's obviously very difficult because she's a hugely totemic figure, especially for the black community, and carries that status with her. I would just add, by the way, that I do think people are slightly dismissive of the letter that she wrote. You know, it was a silly thing and she's apologised. I mean, she essentially said that Jews could not experience the kind of ethnic prejudice and racism that other people felt. And she said, you know, Jews and travellers, or Romanists to put it another way, but another similar group, did never experienced what it was like to face slavery or being made to sit at the back of a bus in America. And that's true. But they did experience that thing called the Holocaust, which was based on ethnicity. And so this wasn't a small thing, she said, and it wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was something she clearly felt. I don't think it was a minor error, this. So you can take a view as to whether you think she should have been thrown out or shouldn't have been thrown out. But I don't think it should be minimised as a nothing mistake. OK, Sarah Olney.
Well, I think that's useful to hear from Robert, you know, just to remember exactly what it was that she said to have her, you know, thrown out of the Labour Party in the first place. Obviously, I can't comment. I have no idea what's going on in the Labour Party. Obviously, these things are coming to a head now that the election has been called. But, you know, I do think, you know, Diane has been an absolute trailblazer. And her comments obviously were very, very serious. But I do think, given, you know, she has been such an inspirational figure to so many people, I do think she deserves a dignified exit. So if this can be resolved some way, then, you know, that I think would everybody would welcome that.
Let's have a follow-up text question from Jane, who says, does Labour no longer care about its core voters? If you say yes, how do you justify the treatment of Diane Abbott and the gushing and swift welcome of Natalie Elphicke? Do you not agree that Labour could have respected their core voters whilst appealing to new ones? I feel I might spoil my ballot. I mean, I have to say, Siobhain, that is very representative of the texts and the calls that we were getting in the last hour.
And I'm really sorry if that is the case. But these things are complicated. We don't know the full facts. And I really wouldn't want to see Diane's career end this way, because she has been such a trailblazer. And the causes she has fought for have been so important. It's obviously got into a bit of a mess.
But elections can turn on things like this, can't they? If people feel that a real injustice has been done, particularly if core voters, as Jane puts it, are no longer feel able to support the Labour Party in key marginal seats, that could be, in the end, catastrophic. Now, I suspect it's because we're at the beginning of the election campaign rather than at the end. I doubt whether this will be dominating our discussions towards the end of the campaign, but even so. I think it, you know, it's a diplomat administrative kind of position that we're in, and Diane needs to be respected. But I think then to extrapolate it out into why we're not going to win all sorts of marginal seats is just a bit of a leap. Sarah, I mean, all political parties have this sort of issue at one stage or another, and it's always convenient in an election campaign. I mean, I read out a statement from Richard Holden, the chairman of the Conservative Party, earlier. It's always, you always attack the other side, but it's sort of almost there, but for the grace of God sometimes, isn't it?
I think that's right. Obviously, political parties are movements, and their power comes from their numbers, and you need to get as many people on your team as you can, whether that's elected into Parliament or membership in the wider sense, or even just voters. So so it is really, really important that you make yourselves as large as possible. But of course, that means that's thousands, hundreds, of individuals, and you can't control what all of those individuals think, feel and say. Of course you can't. You can just hope that you can provide as compelling a message as possible from the centre, from the leadership, that enough people feel that they can buy into that without compromising their own personal thoughts too much, and that you can just maintain a little bit of discipline, especially during an election campaign when it is the most important time. But honestly, it is, I think, possibly one of the most difficult things is to try and pull all of those people together in a short period of time and get everybody on the same page. It really is incredibly difficult.
Jason in Epsom says, Iain, you're so needy and desperate. Well, that may be so on a number of things, but not in this case. He says this will have no impact on the election, period. Conservatives are in for a hammering. Get over it. Robert Shrimsley, I mean, look, you've covered a lot of general election campaigns.
You're calling me old?
I think you're probably younger than me. Probably. We all remember the War of Jennifer's Ear, which dominated the 1992 election campaign, Sharon Storer in 2001. I mean, these things flare up. And I think if you're in the party headquarters, you think they're a disaster. But in the end, they do go away again. I mean, do you think this is a stayer, or do you think this is a temporary blip?
I think it's a little bit between. I don't think it's as minor as the War of Jennifer's Ear or an uncomfortable confrontation in the street somewhere. I think there's a bit of substance to this, and there is a disaffection on the left of the Labour Party and the left of the Labour movement, which you've seen also over Gaza, and you've seen the Green Party able to pull in a bit of support over some environmental issues, and this will all feed into that a little bit. My instinct is that in the end it will not make an enormous difference, because fundamentally the choice before voters is, do you want to get rid of the Conservative government? And if you do, there is ultimately only one alternative, and the people who are of the left and who may be tempted to do protest votes, I think will feel more comfortable doing that if they're in constituencies where they know it's not going to damage the chances of removing the Conservatives.
Right, thank you very much indeed for your answers on that. Let's go to Martin in Doncaster. Hello, Martin.
Hello, Iain and panel. My question is with all the gaps for the PM on the campaign trail, is he the new Mr. Bean?
I feel slightly guilty because Nikki Aiken hasn't arrived yet, but we'll put this question to her when she does. Sarah Olney, free hit for you.
Well, it's not started well for the Conservatives, has it? But I mean, honestly, I think the country are just sick and tired of this Conservative government. They want them out. We've just seen so much incompetence, the way they've mismanaged the economy, the way they've run down our public services, the way that, and the way they're just talking to themselves now. So I do think that, Rishi Sunak's obviously got a bit of a losing battle here, in as much as it's going to be really, really hard for him under any circumstances to present a positive image to the country. But I've got to say, he's not really helping himself, standing out in the rain with his looking like his trousers have shrunk, and he's just going to look hapless now, whatever he does, because I think it's partly the narrative, but it's a well-deserved narrative. So I don't feel that sorry for him.
More hapless than falling off a paddleboard 5 times in Lake Windermere.
Well, I got to be honest, Ed looked like he was quite enjoying himself, to be honest, which you wouldn't say about Rishi standing outside Downing Street last week.
You're right, but when he admitted that he did it deliberately, at least on at least one occasion, and when you think, well, the message was to show how polluted Lake Windermere is, and yet he was quite happy to fall into it 5 times, it doesn't really add up, does it?
Well, I mean, it's true, though. It is true that Windermere and, our rivers, our beaches all across the country are being flooded with sewage, and it's because of a massive failing by the water companies. We need to get to grips with this crisis. And, the Liberal Democrats have got a plan to do that. Ed was talking today about how we want to abolish Ofwat and give a proper regulator with proper teeth, with a real commitment to environmental standards. So he was making a serious point.
Well, let's just hope he doesn't get some awful illness.
I am a bit worried.
Yeah, exactly. Robert Shrimsley.
I think this has been overstated, actually. I think, as Sarah sort of suggested, if you're marked as the losing candidate in an election, then you get whacked with things and they're all gaffes. If Keir Starmer had stood in front of a sign that said exit, no one would make anything of it at all, because it's about where you are in the public scene. I think there's been one important mistake, which was standing in the rain looking like a really feeble launch. Odd that people who spend so much time thinking about their image made that mistake. The others, I think, are unimportant in the extreme. I think the Conservatives are roughly running the campaign that Rishi Sunak wanted to run. Now, that's because they didn't have a lot of options, but nevertheless, that is what they want to do. And I think the Conservative campaign is not so much hapless as I think it's just hopeless, and there's only so much they can do.
Siobhain?
I think people are desperate to be rid of the Tories. I don't think it matters whether he stood out in the rain or not. I don't think it matters whether he stood over the exit sign. People are just
but when
desperate.
you stand by the Titanic exhibition...
I know, but it matters to us, but I'm not sure that it really, it hits with most people who don't think about politics for most of the time. You know, people who can't have their operation or can't get a GP appointment, or who are angry about the state of their local environment or, their kids' school. That's what matters really. And it's how people decide who they want to vote for.
Right. Well,
people want change.
Unfortunately, well, that is the slogan, isn't it? Well, a one-word slogan, which makes a change from 3, which we've got used to, I think, over the last few years. We hope Nikki Aiken will be joining us in just a few moments' time, and we'll come to more of your questions. 0345 6060 973. It's 16 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
17 minutes past 8. Sarah Olney from the Lib Dems, Siobhain McDonagh from Labour, and Robert Shrimsley from the Financial Times. They're with us answering your questions. Let's go to a text question from Jamie in Lincoln. Is Nigel Farage right to say the US election result matters more than ours? Now, while speaking at a Reform UK press conference in Dover this morning, the party's honorary president said that the American election is more important. Strong American leadership, standing up to bullies and leading a strong NATO are absolutely vital, as he explained why he wants Donald Trump to defeat Joe Biden in November, rather ignoring the fact that, of course, Donald Trump seems to be quite keen on coming out of NATO. Robert Shrimsley.
I think in meta terms, in terms of the future of the world, the US election is obviously much more important, and it would clearly be more important if the US elected, again, a man who had shown he doesn't respect democracy. And you would have to ask questions about what would happen to the state of US democracy and the role of the US in being a leader of the free world. I think when you think about it that way, it's clearly more important. Obviously, to people living in Britain, getting on with their daily lives, possibly not. But yeah, and the US election is the most important election this year.
Siobhain.
To people in this country, it's who runs our government, who's sorting out the NHS, who's sorting out schools, who's doing the things that most people are impacted by. Of course, the American election results are really important for all of us, and it's absolutely terrifying to think what will happen to NATO should Donald Trump win, and should what will happen to the Ukraine. So, of course, it's internationally hugely significant. But to most people, most of the time, their concerns are what happens here immediately in front of them.
So if you look at a lot of academic research, most people vote on the economy, on how well off they feel or how well off they think they might be in 5 years' time. I wonder how much. I think in the 1980s, foreign affairs and defence policy did play a big role in elections, but it seems to do less so now.
I think defence and security always matter to people, but internationally maybe less so. And there's so many reasons to come out and vote in these forthcoming British elections that I think people are hugely motivated by. I mean, people have almost lost hope that we can make things better.
I think, by the way, and you shouldn't totally separate this from, the state of the US economy has an immediate and material impact on the state of the British economy. The role that the US is playing in the defence of Europe has an immediate impact on how much money we have to spend defending Europe and ourselves. So it's not a separate issue. It's directly connected.
Sarah.
Well, I think Nigel Farage is probably correct in saying that the US election is going to be more consequential globally than the UK election, but I think he's incorrect in everything else he says about Donald Trump. He's not going to be a better guarantor of global democracy than Joe Biden. And I just don't think Nigel Farage is going to be an important part of either election, much to my relief.
But the thing is, whenever he says something, he makes news, doesn't he? I mean, there were several bits of his speech today that have made the political websites, the papers. We're talking about this. I think other programmes have talked about other things he said in the last couple of days. He makes news.
Well, that's a question for you, I guess. It doesn't make much impact on me. I don't think he's going to have much of an impact on this election. He's not standing. The private company that he's chief executive of is putting up some candidates in a few places, but they're not going to win any seats. So I don't think it might well be that people find what he says interesting, but ultimately I don't think it's going to be very consequential.
I think they're putting up 630 candidates, so that they have a right to be heard, don't they?
Of course they do, but then so are lots of parties. I'm not. But I mean, Nigel Farage himself is not going to be a candidate. He's ruled himself out. So it's yes, they've got a right to be heard, but I suppose it's kind of about the proportion of the platform you give to people who are, yes, they are polling reasonably well, but we saw in the local elections that they're really not actually attracting many votes and certainly not winning seats even at council level.
And Nigel Farage himself, hasn't he stood for Parliament 7 or 8 times and never managed to get elected?
He did get elected to the European Parliament all those times, to be fair.
But never to the UK Parliament.
No, that is true, but he's not alone in that. Many people have tried many times and haven't succeeded. Right, let's go
8?
to 7. Let's go to Scott in Norwich. Hello, Scott.
Good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel. My question is, should the 2024 UK general election be the last fought using the first past the post electoral system?
A little cheer, I think, went up from my right here. Sarah Olney for the Liberal Democrats. Surprise us with your answer.
Go on then. Yes, it absolutely should. It's high time we had voting reform in this country. I don't think that first past the post effectively delivers what it is that people want to say about politics, how they best want to have their views.
Apart from in your constituency.
Obviously in my constituency. Although, even in my constituency, I think, people have a range of views and everybody deserves to have their voices heard. We need every vote to count, and it doesn't under FP.
Everybody's vote counts for exactly the same. They're not weighted.
No, but my point is, so for example, take the Scottish National Party, for example. At the moment, they've got the majority of the seats representing Scotland. They're the third party in Parliament, or they were, but that's sort of less than 5%, I think, of all the votes. So in terms of how much each individual vote is represented in the makeup of Parliament, first past the post really doesn't deliver the outcome. I think that British people are actually wanting to.
But it does deliver a decisive outcome generally. I mean, obviously there are exceptions to that, but and that enables governments and political parties to govern I'm just going to say in a strong and stable way, but maybe after recent years, that's not a very good example. But that is the premise, isn't it?
That's the premise, but I think it's been really heavily tested over the last 10, 15 years. And in actual fact, the last time we had a stable government, dare I say, was a coalition government between Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats. They managed to deliver stable government for 5 years. And what we've seen, the Conservatives on their own...
economy.
Well, we've seen the Conservatives on their own. We've had how many prime ministers in the last 14 years? We've seen how many, Chancellor of the Exchequer. We've seen, so many changes to policy, so many fresh starts, so many, and it's been absolutely chaotic. So I completely don't accept any longer, if it was ever true, that first past the post delivers a stable government.
How many changes of leader of your party had?
We have had
Nick Clegg, Joe
but we've
Swinson,
had only one in the last.
Davey.
We've had only one in the last Parliament.
That is very true, because it is a fact. Siobhain.
I strongly believe in first past the post. I think what keeps politicians clean and hard-working are the fact they have to represent a constituency, and the fact that actually the people decide, that the same old politicians don't do in some sort of alliance or coalition constantly stay in government. So, no, I'm a strong supporter of first past the post.
OK, Robert.
I think there are arguments you can deploy both ways. The only argument I would put some emphasis on. I think there are two. You can either have your coalitions built before the election within a party, or you can have your coalitions built after the election between parties. I don't think PR has shown itself to be inherently more stable, but Sarah's right, of course, it's not been especially stable recently. The only thing I would make is that we have put this to the voters in recent memory, and they voted in a referendum to stay with the existing system.
Wasn't quite PR though, was it?
No, it wasn't, but it was an offer of electoral reform. Support, and
it was
they said no.
70-30, wasn't it? I think I'm right.
I can't remember. I know it was derisory turnout.
Something like that. Nikki Aiken has arrived with us. Hello, welcome.
Nice to be here finally.
No, you'll have been pleased to have not been here for the last questions.
Why? What was it?
Is Rishi Sunak becoming Mr. Bean?
I don't think so, but I had a nightmare because Whitehall's closed.
Oh no!
That's why I'm so late. I would have been here on plenty of time, but there's obviously a Gaza. I can understand why there's a Gaza protest tonight, and that's why I couldn't get here in time. So I'm very sorry.
You're very welcome. The question that we're dealing with at the moment is from Scott, who says, should this be the last general election conducted using the first past the post voting system?
No. And I tell you why. And I've had a few emails from constituents over the last few months about this. And the example I give is Israel. Israel uses a PR system, and they have not had a stable government for a long time now. They've had lots of elections because they can't keep a government.
I think they had 3 in 1 year, didn't they?
They did, yeah.
Things we can only dream of.
And which means then that whoever gets slightly more votes has to rely on extremist parties, and we're seeing the fallout of that, particularly now in Israel. So I really do not think a PR system does work.
There are ways of getting around that, because in the German parliament you have to get 5% of the vote to get a single MP. So you can introduce rules to make sure that doesn't happen, but for whatever reason the Israelis have never done it.
No, but you've also seen it in places like Italy over the years. I mean, not now, but they've got much more of a stable government now. But I just think first past the post, it's worked for us for a long time. And, I think there's an awful lot more we need to be concentrating on. I mean, I'd rather see the reform of the Lords, to be honest, before I saw reform of the electoral system.
Sarah, 3 against 1, so the overwhelming majority, you lose.
Well, quite. But that wouldn't be a very representative outcome, would it?
Well, it would in this case. Right, let's go to another call. It's Robbie in Chelmsford. Will your party be taking a position on Brexit and our relationship with the EU going forward in your manifesto? And can you summarise it? Well, they can't, because the manifestos haven't been released yet. It's the dog that isn't barking in this campaign so far, but it's an XXL bully of an issue to the electorate. It is, so far there's been no discussion about Brexit at all. Is that going to be the case in the future, Nikki?
I would thought so, because we've done Brexit. I mean,
Have we?
Yeah, we have, and we've got to close that door, Ian. I was Remainer. I was devastated when we chose as a nation to leave the EU, but I accepted the vote because I believe in democracy, first past the post, and we saw. I mean, one of the reasons why I stood for election in 2019 was I was so fed up and so frustrated by the lack of progress in anything in Parliament at the time. I mean, Parliament was paralysed between basically 16 and 19, so we had to get it done. And I think Rishi did. Start very, very well with the Windsor Agreement, and he definitely has built bridges. We've certainly had to build bridges. I don't think the European Union bosses were too favourable towards Boris, and I think Rishi's
really,
yeah,
you astonish me.
I know. It's very hard to believe sometimes that Boris didn't really rub up the right way for many people, but Rishi has, I think, built an awful lot of bridges.
Okay, Robert.
Well, I mean, it absolutely is a dog that's not barking in this election. I think sometimes the people who ask this question and point it out, though, are hoping that we revisit the whole issue and that one of the parties will campaign to rejoin either the full EU or the single market or the customs union. And none of them want to go there at the moment. But the idea that it's over, I think, is also wrong because it's an ongoing process. The relationship that the UK has to have with the European Union is not now set in aspic. It's got to keep moving and changing. And I do think we are in a situation where all the main parties, for different reasons, possible exception of the SNP, don't want to discuss this. Labour Party doesn't want to discuss it because it has a heavily Remainer supporting activist base, but is trying to win back Leave voters. And the moment it starts telling you how Brexit isn't working, it gets faced with questions of what you're going to do about it, and the answer's not much. The Conservatives don't want to talk about it because it was their flagship policy, and the majority of the country, according to opinion polls, now think it's not gone very well. And the Liberal Democrats, rather like the Labour Party, don't want to talk about it because even though opposing it was their flagship policy, they've got seats they need to win where they're trying to attract Leave voters. They've won by-elections by pulling over Leave voters, and they don't want to rattle their cages either. So there's a sort of a uniform conspiracy of silence.
Well, let's get short answers from the two parties who don't want to talk about Brexit. Siobhain, let's start with you.
I think it caused such distress between families, between friends. I think everybody doesn't want to reopen that kind of pain and that dispute and that unhappiness. So I think a period of calm is what actually people want.
Sarah?
Well, the Liberal Democrats have always been the most pro-European party, and I think we still are. We've got a very clear plan about, improving our relationship with Europe. It starts with building those bridges, as Nikki said, although, who damaged them in the first place? The Conservatives, so it starts with that, and we need to start having some pragmatic discussions. Some of the side agreements, veterinary agreements, professional qualifications. But most of all, there needs to be a basis of trust, and that's what the Conservative government have so comprehensively destroyed. But I mean, Robert's right. We've just got to keep moving forward.
Right, we will end talking about Brexit there. I'm not sure those answers will have satisfied Robbie, but there we go. More questions in the next half an hour to our panel, 0345 6060 973. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 8:32. Let's get the news headlines with Daryl Jackson.
LBC understands that Diane Abbott was given back the Labour whip earlier today. The veteran MP, who was a strong supporter of former leader Jeremy Corbyn, lost the whip in April last year. The Shadow Chancellor says she wants to lead the most pro-growth and pro-business Treasury the UK's ever seen. The Conservatives are offering pensioners a £2.4 billion tax break. The Lib Dems have campaigned on water quality. The SNP want the UK to recognise a Palestinian state. And officials in Israel say a fire which spread through a camp in southern Gaza may have been caused by an explosion of a weapons stockpile. Palestinian authorities say 45 people were killed in the incident in Rafah. LBC weather cloudy tonight with showers in the north and west and a low of 9 degrees.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060973.
8:18 on LBC. No, it's not. The clocks have stopped in the studio, so I'm sort of. But there is a clock beside me which says it's 8:35 on LBC. Now, in the studio with me for Cross Question, Sarah Olney, Liberal Democrat Treasury spokesperson, MP for Richmond Park; Siobhain McDonagh, Labour MP for Mitchem and Morden; Nickie Aiken, Conservative MP for the cities of London and Westminster; and Robert Shrimsley, Chief UK Political Commentator for the FT. Now, Nickie, you're standing down at this election. So when do you actually stop being an MP? Tomorrow.
Yeah, one more day.
Feeling emotional?
No. Well, I'm quite. I was saying to Sarah, it was very quick because I thought I had another 6 months, and I was planning on doing a few things, but not much. So it was very sudden. But I made my decision for personal reasons in February. My husband's moved overseas, and he supported me for 20 years, so it's my turn to go and support him. My children are leaving school this year. My youngest leaving school, so it's a good time to leave for me personally. I've had a great 4.5 years. I can't quite believe how quickly it's gone, and a fairly quiet time in my first term. Really, not much difference. So look, I loved it. It's an absolute honour. As Siobhain and Sarah will tell you, there are 650 of us. Not all of us take our seats, obviously, but it is such a privilege, and we always use that word privilege and honour, but it really is. And I don't think I will really miss it until after the election. I
mean, you almost sound as if you're being liberated.
It does feel a bit like that, I think, because it is all consuming. It really is. And, I've always wanted to, campaign, and I've always had my local campaigns as well as my national ones. And it is... Siobhain and Sarah will tell you, you're either in it or you're not, and it is everything, and your families do pay a price. And so I'm pleased that I'm now be able to give something back to my family, whether they like seeing me or not. They can see me a bit more. But it has, it's amazing, and never say never. But I don't really have any urge to necessarily come back.
Well, you will be missed.
Thank you.
Khalid is in Leicester. Hello, Khalid.
Hi, Ian.
Hi, what would you like to ask?
Yeah, just a quick question is that, look, now that Israel has been, even before, for decades, they've been brutally occupying the Palestinian lands and taking them into administration, killing them on a regular basis, bombing Gaza and the West Bank and taking prisoners there. Now they've gone into Rafah against international court advice and, decisions. They seem to be not listening to anybody, and they're continuously killing, as we know, 45 were killed the other day, another trend today. Women, children, toddlers, babies. How much more before we take action rather than just words of condemnation? Surely we should be taking action against Israel now.
What kind of action?
I mean, surely there should be a United Nations peacekeeping force going in there and really protecting the innocent civilians, rather than just words of condemnation, which is not good enough. If it was any other country, surely we'd be sending in our forces or doing something practical, physically.
Okay. Let's get our panels for you. Sarah Olney.
Well, the Liberal Democrats have been calling for a bilateral ceasefire since October. We want to get the hostages out. We want to get aid in. Most of all, we need to use this opportunity to really build a lasting peace with a two-state solution. That's always been our position. That what's going on in Rafah is appalling, and the scenes are horrific, and we know that Israel have been talking about this for a while, and I think everybody dreaded this happening. But it's the potential for more humanitarian disaster is just really hard to contemplate. But it's got to be that bilateral ceasefire. That's what's really, really important.
But neither side are interested in a ceasefire, are they? They've made that very clear. What about Khalid's suggestion there of the UN stepping in and offering a peacekeeping force?
I think this is the point at which it is that kind of, well, what's the solution? What else can be done? It is Is there anything the international community can do when it's in this situation, other than continue to press Israel to exercise restraint? It's just such a difficult question, but there's no doubt that we've got to continue to push for that outcome, that bilateral ceasefire.
Siobhain.
For a peacekeeping force of any sort to be successful, both parties would need in the majority to want peace. And if both don't, there's absolutely nothing that's going to be successful. In the end, the only thing that can be successful is politics, a two-state solution. And it does feel pretty hopeless at the moment, but sometimes in the most hopeless occasions you do get progress. But, Palestinians poorly led by Hamas, the Israeli people poorly led by Netanyahu. It's just excruciating to watch what's going on.
Isn't it almost laughable that all Western politicians talk about a two-state solution when it's exactly the same with peace? Neither side want a two-state solution, and there's got to be some sort of willingness in order to even start negotiations. But if there's no willingness on the part of the Palestinians, whether we're talking about Hamas or indeed the Palestinian Authority, and the Israeli, Netanyahu certainly has made it clear he's not interested in a two-state solution, how do you even get it off the ground?
Well, you're right that people have to want it, but in the end, for people to live peacefully side by side, there has to be a two-state solution. There has to be some form of political leadership. I mean, do we hear what the average Palestinian resident actually does want? I find it hard to believe that they want Hamas and they want the turbulence and the lack of jobs, the lack of economic viability. And we know, but what we do know from Israel is that the vast majority of people in Israel don't want Netanyahu. They want a much more reasoned and reasonable coalition of people, which their electoral system is currently denying them.
Robert?
Well, I mean, I think an international peacekeeping force would be lovely if you could get them in safely. But as Siobhain's saying, you have to have both sides prepared to let them function. I think the fundamental problem with where we are now is that the two principal antagonists in this conflict, Hamas and the Netanyahu government, don't believe in a two-state solution. They believe in a one-state solution, their state. And they look at each other as wanting to see each other pushed out of where they are. And they look at each other with total mistrust, and they're right to, because both are totally antagonistic to each other. And so until you get a change of leadership in Israel and other people coming forward to lead and speak for the Palestinian people, but whether it's the Palestinian Authority or someone else, you're stuck in a loop. And I think the best we can hope for at the moment is reaching a point where we do have a ceasefire and you begin to allow some of the time that allows people to move together again. But it is an absolutely desperate and hopeless situation.
Nikki?
I despair of the whole situation, obviously, like most people. And I saw the 6 o'clock news this evening, and what the pictures that always stay with me are the children. And there are so many children that have been, that lost parents, lost family members, have just been terrified. And, that they will spend the rest of their lives traumatised by what has happened to them. And I think, as everybody said around the table, until we have two sides that want to have peace, whatever peace looks like to them, we are never going to find a solution. And continually, the people of Palestine will suffer. And we have to accept that us as the West and the Middle Eastern countries have forgotten the Palestinians for decades. It was always in the too hard to fix category. And I went to Israel a couple of years ago. I went to the West Bank, and I remember seeing 3 boys aged about 12 walking home from school, and the whole place. I was in Ramallah, and the rubbish was strewn across the street, and there was potholes. There was nothing to give you any hope in this area. And I remember seeing those 3 boys thinking, what is your future? And it is the politicians that have got to bring this to an end. And we saw it in Northern Ireland. Violence never, ever wins. It is the political process that eventually brings
but
peace.
There you had the terror organisation eventually realising that they couldn't win a military victory, and they decided to enter a peace process.
Yeah.
That's the difference between then and now.
No, Hamas is not going to do that. And Hamas, as we know, we saw at the weekend, firing rockets back into Israel, they are still being armed. And I guess they're being armed by the Iranians and others. So, look, I would love to see a two-state solution. But as we've all said around this table, we are not going to get one with Hamas in charge of Gaza and with the Netanyahu government. I will be interested to see what happens next week when the opposition leader, who's in the cabinet now, the Benny Gantz, he is given the 6th of June as his deadline for a decision on how you rebuild Gaza. And I guess he's going to be leaving the cabinet, and then where that leaves everybody. But I think we have to remember that I think the people of Israel are not happy with their government either. And I think Sarah was the one who mentioned at the very beginning, let's not forget the hostages. There are over 100 people, innocent civilians, who were taken from their homes in the most terrifying situation on the 7th of October, and we have not seen.
And we still don't know how many of them are still alive.
Exactly. So let's not forget those people either. And I've had 5,000 emails about this, Iain. Not one of them has ever mentioned the hostages.
Well, I mean, that's a disgrace, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right, we'll move on in just a moment. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 8:47.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
It is 8:48 on LBC. Sarah Olney is here, Siobhain, McDonagh, Nickie Aiken and Robert Shrimsley. Oscar is in Cheltenham and he wants to know, is it possible to be on the side of pensioners without hurting younger people while doing so? Now, the Conservatives have pledged to introduce a triple lock plus, which would raise pensioners' tax-free allowances alongside the existing increase in the state pension. Labour and the Liberal Democrats have both committed to supporting the existing triple lock. What's this all about, Nikki?
Well, I think he's got a fair point. We can't forget the young, and I'm very proud of what we have achieved in this country. No matter what people say, we have achieved a lot over the last 14 years, and we have had to deal with an awful lot of issues like COVID and war in Europe again. But we have to ensure that we give our young people a future. We've got to build more homes. That is the number one priority for me, for the next government, is we have got to build more homes. We've built 1 million homes since we came to power in the last 10 years, but we've got to build more. Look, I've got no issue with the triple lock plus. I think it's a very good idea. I think
Just explain what it involves.
So, as I understand it, the triple lock protects people's pensions. It ensures that it rises with inflation or with wages, whatever is the highest. And because of wage growth over recent years and tax thresholds, pensions, there's a fear that state pensions will become taxable. And the triple lock plus, the plus bit is to ensure that pensioners' tax thresholds rises with the wages. And so they will not, the state pension, not private pension, not other taxes, but we're talking specifically about the state pension, will remain tax-free. I understand that the Labour Party are not supporting it, and they prefer to have a retirement tax, or pension tax. But no, I think it's a very good idea. I think it recognises that people with pensions have paid their stamp, as my mum would call it.
But pensioners are, if you look at the demographics of the country, the richest age group. So why wouldn't, if you had £2.5 billion to spare, why wouldn't you invest it in youth services?
Well, we are now, the £2.5 billion for the National Service new scheme, which I think is an excellent scheme. I think there's been an awful lot of criticism from certain quarters about it and concentrating on people going to the army. It's not about that. It's about giving 18-year-olds the chance to experience things that they would never have experienced before, and to give them a real understanding of...
Both of these promises are being paid by cutting down on tax avoidance. And you when I say you, I mean your party rather than you particularly, have been very quick to criticise Labour for using exactly the same sort of source for funding some of their promises.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that it's time that my personal view, Ian, has been before I entered Parliament, we need to have proper reform of so much of our tax, particularly around council tax. Council tax is the most non-progressive tax I've ever come across. We've seen the way that local council finance is on its knees, and it will be on its knees by whoever is in power because of the way it is so centralised. We have got to reform it. We've got to reform so much. We've got to reform the NHS, the way the NHS is run. Okay. I know that Wes Streeting agrees with me. And I think we've got to really look at our public services and how they are run moving forward.
Siobhain, what's wrong with this idea? Because it does seem that there's a certain logic to it, isn't there? If pensioners are going to fall within income tax allowances for
the
their
reason
state
why
pension.
this is happening is because in order to get more money, the government have introduced fiscal drag, which means that the personal allowances aren't going up with inflation. So that's why the prospect is that in 27-28 you could see the retirement pension taxed. So I think, it's a schizophrenic dog whistle, isn't it? So only a few months ago, in order to provide some form of tax cuts regarded as reviving the Conservative Party, we saw cuts in national insurance, and national insurance was chosen because pensioners don't pay it, and so it would cost less and they wouldn't benefit from it. And now we want to change tax thresholds to benefit pensioners because there's an election and the Conservatives feel that it would do them some good.
And pensioners vote.
Yes, that's right. But I have to say that it needs a great deal more than £100 a year to get the over 65s. I think you have to get to the over 75 age group before there's more Conservative voters than Labour. I mean, the NHS, 8 million people on the waiting lists.
What's it in Wales?
Well, let's not. I don't want to get sidetracked onto NHS waiting list because we're talking about the pension triple lock plus. Sarah.
Well, I was just going to say about the NHS though, because your questioner was asking, how can you provide both for the young and for the old, or do you have to choose? And I was precisely going to say that actually the Liberal Democrats, our main message in this election campaign is going to be we need to fix the NHS. Our main plan is to get 8,000 more GPs to really open up the number of appointments because that's a real pressure point for people. We want to improve cancer care.
Okay, but what about this?
What about
why is this Tory suggestion wrong?
The Tory suggestion about
the pensions triple lock plus.
The pensions triple lock. Well, because it's a deception. The Resolution Foundation estimated that due to the frozen thresholds that Siobhain was talking about, pensioners are due to pay about an extra £1,000 a year £1,000 in tax over the course of the next Parliament, whereas the Conservatives' plan today will give them about 230 of that back. So, it's really, again, and we've seen this with the national insurance cut, it's a deception. You're not getting lower taxes from the Conservatives. They continue to be higher than they've ever been. And Siobhain is exactly right. If they had continued to increase the personal allowance in line with inflation, then the triple lock would have meant that if you relied solely on your state pension, you wouldn't be paying tax. So it's not remotely a generous offer.
I think there was, some time ago, there was a personal allowance, particularly for pensioners. And
which was
who was it
scrapped
who
by the
abolished
Conservatives.
It? Yeah, George Osborne.
Did he? News to me, but I believe you.
Yeah.
Robert?
Well, I think you've heard the arguments about this. Look, I don't think the basic state pension is a particularly generous thing. So I think looking after people who rely on that exclusively is a perfectly reasonable policy goal. But I think the simple fact, in answer to your question as to why the old are prioritised over the young, I cannot fault Rishi Sunak's political judgment in this position. The old, there's a lot of them and they vote, and the young are much less good at voting. And I'm afraid if you're the Conservatives and you have a lot of older voters and you've upset them in your last budget, then doing something to try and claw that back, whether you think it's right or wrong morally, electorally, I can't fault it.
I'm going to read this text out as a comment rather than a question, because we actually haven't got time to really go into it in great detail. But Connor in London says, I read an article in The Economist magazine about demography and government programmes to raise birth rates. It seems relevant since the lines of battle in this election have been drawn on generational lines. The article seemed to come to the conclusion that there are no easy answers or morally acceptable ones to raise the birth rate. Either we reverse ground gained when it comes to teenage pregnancy, or we accept gerontocracy. What do all of you think of this difficult conclusion and its political implications? I'm going to give you each about 20 seconds. Nikki.
Well, thanks for that one. Look, I think it's a fascinating article, and I'll actually go and look it up. But I think that we do have to deal with an ever ageing population. We are living a lot longer with an awful lot more health issues. And the one big thing, whatever government comes in a couple of weeks' time, the one thing they have got to sort out is social care.
OK. Sarah.
I think we could make it a lot easier to raise children in this country. We could sort out the housing crisis. We could make childcare more affordable. We could make education, better for young people and give them more options later in life when they, as they come into adulthood. So I just think that the prospect of becoming a parent and the ease of being a parent is something that we could do something about with a few policy choices.
Siobhain?
One child in every class in London schools is living in temporary accommodation. Families can't afford rents, they can't afford to buy. We have some of our councils in London that may become bankrupt just because of how much temporary accommodation costs. I mean, the circumstances in which you bring a child in, the financial circumstances are so tough. And don't even talk about childcare. That's a second mortgage. So we're making it very hard for people.
Robert, isn't the simple answer that people should have more sex?
Well, I think the simple answer is they should have more babies. It's not necessarily
one thing leads to another.
The same thing. But I mean, I'm afraid no government policies anywhere in the world are delivering a significant increase in the birth rate. Someone was telling me today that even the extraordinarily conservative regime of Iran has a falling and very low birth rate. There is only one policy that has been successful in addressing the problem caused by this, but it's very controversial because it's immigration.
Dun, dun,
on that controversial note, let's quickly move on to our fun question from Amit in Harlow.
That was the fun question.
I'll try to make it so. If Ed Davey is rubbish at paddleboarding, what adventure sport are you actually quite good at? Now, this is going to test you all, isn't it? A few seconds to mull over your answers for this. Sarah, you look as if you might be an adventure sportswoman.
Well, you're completely mistaken. I stay away from all kinds of sports, particularly adventurous ones, but I have done quite a bit of kayaking, so I would take that, but only on very, very gentle, shallow rivers.
Nikki?
I just do jigsaws, Ian. Jigsaws are my...
Do you really?
I finished my second one last night, in a week.
Do you not have a life?
I do. No, I don't. Not anymore. Not anymore.
But you will soon. Siobhain?
Well, if you could class Northern Soul dancing as an adventure sport, that would be mine.
I've seen you in a different light, Siobhain.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we can class it as that, but we'll let you get away with it.
Thank you.
Robert?
Well, I stay away from all adventurous sports. I think the most adventurous sport I engage in, the most dangerous sport, is telling my wife that it's her turn to get up and feed the dog in the morning.
Oh dear. I used to be quite a good skier. I used to lose all sense of inhibition and danger skiing. Whereas normally I'm a complete coward. But, right, well, thank you very much indeed to all of you, to Siobhain, to Robert, to Nikki and to Sarah. On tomorrow's panel, the former Conservative MP and Minister Angela Knight, former Labour MP, MEP and Minister Sean Simon, the journalist and broadcaster Angela Epstein and the pollster Joe Twyman. Coming up in a moment, I want to turn to the subject of another election, the US election, because Donald Trump has been booed at a Libertarian convention, booed by his own supporters indeed. Joe Biden has been having a few moments of trouble this week as well. We'll tell you about those as well, particularly relating to Gaza. A lot of people think he's been far too pro-Israel. I'm going to ask you a very simple question. At this stage in the US election process, if you had a vote, who would you vote for, Trump or Biden? 0345 6060 973. Or are you hoping that somehow a third-party candidate will come through the middle and beat them both? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, it's understood that Diane Abbott was given back the Labour whip